Today we're going to set up a racing cockpit for only 160 bucks, and yes, that's including this big TV. Building one isn't usually cheap. You can easily spend thousands of euros without even knowing if it's something you're going to enjoy, and that is why I've created the most economical sim racing setup possible to see if it's something that suits me, with the possibility of investing more later on. At the end, after enjoying being competitive in racing motorcycle games such as Ride or MotoGP, I considered that perhaps the experience in car simulators was much better, simply because we leave the controller aside and have a much more realistic and closer to reality communication with the game. At the end, we're now using the same input device, or at least similar. As always, going for the expensive side of things would be the easiest path, but I believe it is much better to try and stick to a budget-friendly setup to build something accessible to everyone. Assuming we have the space, we now need obviously some furniture, and as I mentioned, we're aiming to make it really cheap. The most common solution would be to use a table or a board, but the most creative solution I found without spending any money was to use two drawers that I had here in the studio, creating a separation between them to fit the sim. It's been very helpful that Bebor sent me a wheel stand, but it's not something I'm going to recommend to you, because if you stick with the first option I gave you, which would be using a table, then you won't need this, especially for beginners. That's what I would recommend. This is a bit better in terms of ergonomics, but I don't think it's very different for the cost it has. Now let's move on to a very important element. What monitor are we going to use? Personally, I believe immersion is a key factor, and that's why they often use 3 monitors side by side, but we're going to achieve something similar in a very simple and much cheaper way. Instead of combining different monitors, we're aiming for one big TV. Specifically, after taking measurements, I realized that the perfect size for this sim would be of 42 inches. And let's remember, how do we fit a television of this type into a budget of only 160 euros? Fortunately, so far everything has been free, but now we will have to spend some money. Doing a little search on the second-hand market, I found televisions of this type. These LGs are a few years old, they are IPS televisions, and they do have one drawback. They're only Full HD, so 1080p at 60 Hz, which for the size and how close we'll be sitting, it really can slightly diminish the experience. But honestly, if we're looking to make it cheap and try to get into this world, I think they're the perfect choice to save some money. The one I bought was advertised for 65 and they were okay with my offer, which was 50 euros. So that was such a good price, I had no other option rather than going and taking it. It also came with a surprise, which we will see later, because not everything is as beautiful as it seems. I assume that most of us will use headphones, but to make this experience even more immersive, and since I would like to have some friends here trying to compete between us, I want to be able to use speakers and to not have to rely on those inside the TV. So again, I had an old Logitech 2.1 kit, which was broken from multiple places, and since I remember the sound they produced was quite strong, the best thing I could do was to spend an afternoon taking care of everything, having to fix the bass amplifier, reattaching the air outlet tube, and finally fixing the broken cable. If anyone is looking for the same thing, I've seen them in the second-hand market in good conditions at ridiculous prices between 10 and 20 bucks. Finally, regarding the biggest question, what most of you are waiting for, what steering wheel are we going to use? Well, obviously it's going to be similar with everything else we're setting up. And again, it's nothing spectacular, it's a second-hand Logitech G25 that I bought for 100 euros. I bought it many years ago, although I had it banished in a cardboard box waiting for a moment like this, and it's much easier to find a G27, or even if you stretch a little bit, you can go for the G29. But I simply prefer it over other options because of how versatile it is, with its complete pedal set, with all the shifting options, sequential paddles, and an acceptable force feedback for the price range we're in. So this G25 is not from the latest generation, but it covers all the range of possibilities without having to buy anything else. At the end, it allows a person without experience like me to try different modes and see what they are really like, being able to switch between rally, Formula 1 and street cars, to give some examples. And something I haven't talked about yet, the computer. I'm going to use one that we built here some time ago, a mini ITX that cost me only 300 euros and has an i7 4790K and the 6GB version of the GTX 1060. So why didn't I include this inside the initial budget? That's because I could easily use my main computer switching sides with the monitors, and I assume that most people who want to create a sim racing setup already have one for gaming, at least. Similarly, I've used the first keyboard and mouse I found at home just to navigate through Windows. And obviously we're missing something, we're missing a chair. I'm not going to use the typical gamer chairs simply because I can't lock their wheels, and I need to be stable, so I'm going to steal one from the dining table. Yes, it's not as comfortable, but it's much cheaper than a semi-bucket seat, and above everything, much more practical. Before trying it out, I wanted to add a small detail that I think will add even more immersion. Litme sent me these backlight LED kits for the back side of the screen, which synchronizes real-time with the screen and expands what we're seeing, just like a Philips Ambilight. Again, it's not a must, but it will add a nice touch to the setup, although with a backwall background ended up not being the best choice. After spending a few hours trying out different simulators, whether it's Formula 1, WRC or Assetto Corsa, I'm quite surprised by the compatibility that this steering wheel still has today in current games, even though I want to make it clear that it hasn't been a smooth experience. Buying this TV at such a low prices had a hidden surprise. The owner told me it was working as new, but that was far from the truth. It didn't take long for me to realize that something was wrong. It barely had any brightness, and it's like it had some flashing lights inside. The first thing that I did was to open it up to see if there was a bad connection, and when I saw that wasn't the case, and even though the owner offered to refund me, the price at which I bought it made this so competitively cheap that I had to try to fix it. Since adjusting the brightness setting with a TV remote doesn't have any impact, and we have some rather strange numbers on the multimeter when checking the backlight voltage, it seems quite obvious that there is a short circuit somewhere in the backlight LEDs. This is both good and bad news. The good thing is that they are very cheap. Looking up with the serial number, I bought them on AliExpress for only €11. The bad thing is that you have to disassemble the television almost completely to access them, but with patience and some time, it wasn't difficult and I was able to fix it. So setting up a setup like this, as you've seen, even though I've used some things I had at home, it's particularly simple. Although, as they say, your mileage may vary. I'm sharing the problems I found in my case, and the other option would be to buy everything new, spend a lot of money, and you could easily replicate it. But for now, this seems a much more interesting option to me. It would be really easy for me to simply buy everything, drop some links down below, earn a commission, and that's it. This is the hard path, and if I have to tell you the truth, what I like the most about fixing both the TV and the speakers for this is not saving a couple dollars, euros, bucks, it's rather that now I know how to do some things that I didn't know before.